I figured my dream house in Pine Haven Gardens would be perfect until the HOA president Diane demanded copies of all my keys for emergency access. She grew increasingly hostile when I refused her suspicious request. Later, I discovered her college-age son had been breaking into homes across the neighborhood using HOA-collected keys. What would you do if you were me? Keys jingled in my hand as I stood on the porch of my new Tudor-style home in Pine Haven Gardens. After 15 years of saving every penny from my locksmith business, I'd finally done it. I purchased my dream house complete with the perfect security system I'd designed myself. The brass knocker gleamed in the afternoon light as I pushed the door open for the first time as the owner. "Home sweet home," I whispered, taking in the oak floors and vaulted ceilings. My phone buzzed with congratulatory texts from friends. I'd earned this moment. Every lock, every deadbolt, every security feature was top of the line. In my business, I'd seen too many break-ins not to take home security seriously. I was halfway through unpacking my kitchen when the doorbell rang. Outside stood a middle-aged woman with a perfect blonde bob and a clipboard, wearing a salmon-colored blazer despite the summer heat. "Welcome to Pine Haven Gardens." Her smile was wide, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm Diane Thompson, HOA president. Just making my rounds to meet our newest resident." "Nice to meet you. I'm just getting settled in." "Wonderful house you've purchased," she interrupted, stepping past me into my foyer without waiting for an invitation. "The Andersons kept it in such good condition, though I see you've already changed the locks." The observation sent a small chill down my spine. "Yes, I install security systems professionally." She nodded, making a note on her clipboard. "Well, that brings me to HOA business. I'll need a complete set of keys for your property." I blinked, sure I'd misheard. "I'm sorry. House keys, shed keys, any security gates. We keep a master set for emergencies and maintenance access." Her tone was matter-of-fact, as if requesting a glass of water. "I don't think that would be appropriate," I said carefully. "I value my privacy, and as a security professional, it's not optional." Diane cut in, her smile tightening. "It's in the community bylaws. All residents provide key copies to the board for safety reasons." As something felt wrong, but it was my first day. I didn't want to start trouble. "I'll need to review the HOA documents before I can agree to that. I haven't fully read through them yet." Her perfectly manicured hand gripped the clipboard tighter. "Of course you should read them, but don't wait too long. Compliance is expected within 7 days of moving in." As she turned to leave, a young man in his early 20s pulled into the driveway across the street. He stepped out of an expensive-looking car and watched us with interest. "My son, Kevin," Diane called out with clear pride. "He's home from college for the summer. He helps manage properties for the HOA. You'll be seeing him around." Kevin gave a lazy wave, but something in his gaze made me uncomfortable as it swept over my house. I nodded politely and watched them both retreat to their large colonial directly opposite mine. That night, I pored over the HOA covenant line by line. Nothing, absolutely nothing about residents being required to surrender their keys. I double-checked, triple-checked. The document mentioned emergency access protocols that involved contacting homeowners directly, not using master keys. Sleep eluded me as I wrestled with what to do. In my 15 years as a locksmith, I'd never heard of an HOA demanding private home keys. It violated every security principle I believed in. Heavy footsteps on my porch woke me at 6:00 a.m. I rushed downstairs to find a bright orange violation notice taped to my door. Notice of HOA violation. Failure to provide required key copies. $50 per day fine until compliance. Reference Community Safety Protocol. I tore it down, anger bubbling up. Not even 24 hours in my dream home, and already this. Through my window, I spotted Diane Power walking the neighborhood in expensive athletic wear clipboard, still in hand. The next day brought a second violation notice and a friendly visit from my neighbor to the right, an older gentleman named George. "Don't let Diane bully you," he advised while helping me unpack boxes. "She runs this place like her personal kingdom. Half the neighborhood is terrified of her." "But demanding house keys can't be legal," I protested. George sighed. "Most folks just give in. It's easier than fighting the HOA machine. Diane's been president for 8 years, running unopposed." As we talked, I noticed Kevin Thompson across the street washing his car, but clearly watching my house. When our eyes met, he didn't look away, just smiled and continued staring. By day 5, the violation notices had increased to $100 daily, and my mailbox had been mysteriously damaged overnight. I'd installed a doorbell camera and caught Kevin walking past my house at midnight, slowing to examine my security system. I called a lawyer friend who specialized in real estate law. "This is highly unusual and potentially illegal issue," she confirmed after reviewing my HOA documents. "They have no right to demand your keys, period." Armed with this knowledge, I wrote a formal letter citing the relevant state laws about residential privacy and noting the absence of any key requirement in the HOA covenant. I delivered it to Diane's mailbox and installed additional cameras around my property. The next morning, I found my tires slashed. No proof who did it, but as I waited for roadside assistance, Diane strolled by. "Such a shame," she remarked with artificial sympathy. "Pine Haven used to be so safe before people started ignoring community rules." The threat couldn't have been clearer. As I watched her retreating back, I realized this wasn't just about keys or rules. This was about power and control, and for some reason Diane Thompson saw me as a threat. Later that week, I arrived home to find 3 board members waiting on my porch. "We're here about your continued violations," the treasurer began nervously, "and your baseless accusations against our president," added someone else muttered. I invited them in and laid out the evidence, the HOA documents with no key requirements, the state laws protecting homeowner privacy, and the pattern of harassment since I'd refused to comply. The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. "There's been a misunderstanding, Mao," the treasurer finally said. "The key policy is traditional, not actually written, but everyone complies." "Why?" I pressed. "Why would anyone hand over keys to their private home as—" No one answered, but their discomfort spoke volumes. As they left, my elderly neighbor Eleanor from across the cul-de-sac approached slowly with her small dog. "Be careful," she whispered, pretending to chat about gardening. "Last year the Davises refused to give their keys too. 2 weeks later, they had a mysterious break-in. Nothing was stolen, but they gave their keys after that." Her words sent ice through my veins. As I watched Kevin Thompson pull into his driveway that evening, laughing on his phone, I couldn't help but wonder what game the Thompsons were playing and why my refusal to hand over my keys had made me their target. "Stop calling about this. There's nothing we can do without evidence." The police officer's frustrated voice came through my phone speaker as I photographed the broken garden lights along my walkway. 3 weeks had passed since I'd moved in, and the accidents around my property were piling up: damaged mailbox, slashed tires, broken landscape lighting. And now, my smart doorbell camera had been spray-painted black overnight. "This is the 4th incident this week," I insisted. "I'm being targeted by my HOA president. Neighborly disputes aren't police matters, sir, unless you have proof of who's doing the damage." "Ban!" I hung up, frustrated. The violation notices now totaled over $2,000 in fines, with a warning that a lien could be placed on my property if left unpaid. My security business was suffering too. I'd been so consumed with this battle that I'd missed appointments and lost clients. My dream home was becoming a nightmare, and all because I wouldn't hand over my keys. That evening, a knock at my door revealed Kevin Thompson, grinning casually. "Hey neighbor, Mom wanted me to drop off your invitation to the community barbecue this weekend." He handed me an envelope. "Also, I locked myself out of our house. Mom mentioned you're a locksmith. I could really use some help." The trap was so obvious, it was almost insulting. "Sorry, I don't do residential work anymore," I replied coldly, "but I can recommend several companies." His friendly facade slipped for just a moment. "Right, well, enjoy the barbecue. Though most people there will be wondering why you insist on breaking the rules everyone else follows." As he sauntered away, the community barbecue invitation felt more like a summons to a public trial. I spent that night installing hidden cameras around my property. Not the obvious ones like my painted-over doorbell, but tiny state-of-the-art devices concealed in birdhouses, lawn ornaments, and siding. If someone was going to cross the line, I'd have proof. The next day, I took a different approach. Instead of hiding in my fortress, I walked the neighborhood, introducing myself to everyone I met. Most were cordial but guarded. A few, however, shared whispered stories about the Thompsons. "Diane gets what Diane wants," said a young mother, pushing a stroller. "We learned that when she demanded we remove our children's playset because it was 3 inches taller than regulations." A retired couple admitted they'd surrendered their keys years ago. "We winter in Florida. It seemed reasonable for emergencies," the husband explained, though his wife looked less convinced. By the time Saturday's barbecue arrived, I had pieced together an unsettling pattern. Homes that had surrendered keys experienced fewer violations. Homes with absent owners, traveling professionals, snowbirds, frequent vacationers were particular targets for the key policy. The community park buzzed with activity as I arrived at the barbecue. Diane held court by the grills, directing volunteers with imperial authority. When she spotted me, she waved enthusiastically as if we were old friends. "Everyone meet our newest neighbor, the security expert who thinks his house is Fort Knox." Her voice carried across the lawn, drawing all eyes to me. Uncomfortable laughter rippled through the crowd. I felt the isolation she was creating, marking me as difficult, unreasonable. I filled my plate and sat at an empty table, soon joined by George and his wife. "Quite the entrance," George muttered. "Diane's in rare form today." A shadow fell across our table. Kevin carrying 2 beers. "Peace offering." He set one before me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mom can be intense about rules, but she means well." "Does she?" I asked quietly, because threatening and harassing a new neighbor doesn't seem well-intentioned. Kevin's charm vanished instantly. "Careful. People who don't fit in at Pine Haven Gardens tend to have difficulties." Before I could respond, a commotion erupted across the park. Eleanor, my elderly neighbor, had collapsed near the dessert table. As people rushed to help, I noticed something odd. Kevin slipping away from the crowd, moving quickly toward the residential streets. Instinct made me follow at a distance. He headed straight for my street, glancing around furtively before approaching my house from behind a tree. I watched him test my front door, then move to a window, jimmying it with something from his pocket. My blood boiled, but I forced myself to wait to document. The hidden camera in my porch light would be capturing everything. After a few frustrated minutes, Kevin gave up and jogged back toward the park. I beat him there, arriving breathless just as an ambulance was leaving with Eleanor. George explained she'd had a mild heat stroke but would recover. "Where'd you disappear to?" Diane cornered me by the water coolers, her eyes suspicious. "Bathroom," I lied. "Is Eleanor going to be okay?" "She's fine. Poor timing, though. She was about to tell everyone about her vacation plans. She's visiting her daughter for 3 weeks." The casual way Diane shared this information sent chills down my spine. 3 weeks of an empty house. And that reminds me, she continued, voice honey sweet, the board voted yesterday. Your fines have been increased to $200 daily and will be placing a lien on your property next week unless you comply with the key policy. Her satisfied smile made it clear she thought she'd won. The barbecue wound down as storm clouds gathered. I helped clean up, using the opportunity to chat with board members individually. The treasurer, a nervous accountant named Howard Jenkins, was particularly revealing. After a few beers between us, he whispered, I never liked the key policy, but Diane insists it's for insurance purposes. Something about reducing our community liability rates. Is that documented anywhere? I asked casually. There should be insurance paperwork. He frowned. Actually, I've never seen it. Diane handles all that directly. Lightning flashed as I drove home, my mind racing. If there was no insurance benefit, what was the real purpose of collecting everyone's keys? The answer was waiting on my phone alerts from my hidden cameras, showing Kevin returning to my property during the storm, testing windows again before the rain drove him away. That night, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I reviewed weeks of security footage, neighborhood conversations, and HOA documents, searching for a pattern. Around 3:00 a.m., I found it. Cross-referencing the homes that had reported maintenance issues or minor break-ins with Diane's meticulous attendance records from HOA meetings. Houses whose owners missed meetings or traveled frequently were disproportionately targeted, and Kevin seemed to appear in my security footage most often when I was known to be away. The pieces finally clicked into place as thunder rolled outside. This wasn't about HOA rules or community safety. This was systematic. The Thompsons were using the key policy and HOA authority to access homes when residents were absent. But for what purpose? Theft, something worse. I was still pondering this when my phone rang. Eleanor's number, calling from the hospital. They broke in, she sobbed. While I was gone, the nurse let me call home to check on my cat, and a man answered my phone. When I asked who he was, he hung up. Police are there now, but I'm scared to go home. My hands shook with anger as I promised to check on her house. Hanging up, I noticed a text from George. Diane called emergency board meeting tomorrow. Topic: your eviction from Pine Haven Gardens. This has gone too far. I'm with you. Rain lashed against my windows as I made a decision. The time for defense was over. Tomorrow, I would take the fight directly to Diane Thompson with evidence that would shock the entire community and expose whatever game she and Kevin were playing with our homes, our privacy, and our trust. My hands trembled as I stared at the growing pile of violation notices on my kitchen counter. 30 days of fines had added up to nearly $3,000. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus at work, and jumped at every sound outside my windows. This had to end. I picked up my phone and did something Diane wouldn't expect. I called her directly. Hello? Her voice dripped with fake sweetness. Diane, it's Alex from 1538 Chestnut Lane. I've been thinking about your request for my house keys. A pause. Well, it's about time you came to your senses. I'd like to discuss it in person. Could we meet tomorrow? She agreed immediately, not bothering to hide her triumph. That night, I drove to a specialized locksmith 2 towns over, someone I'd worked with during my locksmith days. For 3 hours, we created what looked like ordinary house keys, but were actually impossible to duplicate and would trigger my upgraded security system if used. These are beautiful work, Bob, I told the locksmith. They'll never know the difference. Just be careful, he warned. People who want keys this badly usually have bad intentions. When Diane arrived at my house the next day, I invited her in with a smile. She wore an expensive pantsuit and kept glancing around, clearly cataloging my possessions. I've reconsidered your request, I said, placing the special keys on the coffee table. But I have some questions about the exact purpose of these keys. My phone recording in my pocket captured every word. Diane sighed dramatically. It's for emergencies, water leaks, fire hazards, that sort of thing. And who exactly would have access to these keys? The keys are kept in a secure lockbox that only board members can access, including your son, Kevin. Her smile tightened. Kevin is training in property management. He assists me with HOA matters, so he would have access to my house keys. For legitimate purposes only, of course. Kevin is learning the business. It's good for young people to have responsibility. I nodded thoughtfully. And have these emergency entries been needed often in Pine Haven? No, more than you'd think, was she replied, reaching for the keys. Last month alone, we conducted 3 emergency inspections while homeowners were away. I slid the keys toward her, watching as she quickly pocketed them. I hope I've resolved your violation status now, she said, standing to leave. Consider your slate clean. Welcome to the Pine Haven family. After she left, I checked my recording. She had directly admitted the keys were for Kevin's property management training and confirmed unauthorized entry into homes. I sent copies to my email and cloud storage, then activated the special alert function on my security system. Now all I had to do was wait. I didn't have to wait long. 2 nights later, at 11:42 p.m., my phone buzzed with a security alert. Someone was attempting to use the keys on my front door. I watched through my security app as Kevin struggled with the lock, growing increasingly frustrated. The special keys looked normal but wouldn't turn properly, and each attempt was triggering a silent alarm to my phone and marking his hands with an invisible UV dye that would show up under special light. I called the police immediately, speaking quietly. Someone is attempting to break into my home right now. I have them on security camera. Stay in a secure location. Officers are on the way, the dispatcher instructed. I watched Kevin finally give up on the keys and move to my back door, testing windows along the way. My heart pounded as I heard him trying to force the kitchen window. The police were still 7 minutes out, according to my app. Kevin must have heard something, perhaps a neighbor's dog barking, because he suddenly froze, then sprinted across my backyard, disappearing into the darkness between houses. When the police arrived, I showed them my security footage and explained the situation, including the custom keys and my recording of Diane. They took my statement seriously, especially when I mentioned Eleanor's warning about previous break-ins. We need to check if he's gone home, one officer said. If your story checks out, we'll need to get a warrant. We walked across the street to Diane's house, but it was dark. No cars in the driveway. They must have left in a hurry, the officer noted, shining his flashlight on fresh tire marks in the driveway. By morning, both Diane and Kevin had vanished. Their sudden disappearance set off alarm bells throughout the neighborhood. Eleanor, my elderly neighbor, finally felt safe enough to come forward with what she knew. It wasn't just Kevin, she told police in her statement, which I was asked to witness. Diane has been running this scheme for years. She demands keys for HOA purposes, then they target homes when people are away. As detectives began interviewing other residents, a disturbing pattern emerged. 5 break-ins over the past year, all homes belonging to residents who had surrendered their keys. All dismissed as random crimes by Diane, who controlled the HOA security committee and had discouraged homeowners from filing police reports. What puzzled me was how they knew when to strike, until Eleanor showed me the HOA's vacation notification form that Diane had required everyone to fill out. It was all there, when we'd be gone for how long, even if we had alarm systems. The investigation was building, but Diane and Kevin remained missing. I couldn't sleep, wondering if they might return, maybe targeting me for revenge. Each night, I've checked and rechecked my locks and security system. 3 days after their disappearance, the police called me. "We've traced their credit card to a motel just across the state line," Detective Miller explained. "Local police are moving in now." I held my breath, waiting for news that would finally let me sleep peacefully in my dream home. But what they found in that motel room would shock everyone in Pine Haven Gardens more than we could have imagined. They found what... I nearly dropped my phone when Detective Miller called with an update. "A laptop with detailed files on every home in Pine Haven Gardens," she explained. "Floor plans, alarm codes, schedules of when people come and go, lists of valuable items, and where they're kept." I sat down heavily on my couch. How long has this been going on? Based on the files, at least 3 years. But here's where it gets worse. They weren't working alone. My stomach knotted. Who else? The HOA Treasurer Howard Jenkins and the Security Committee Chair Bethany Carter. It was a whole operation. They used HOA positions to gather information, then targeted homes when owners were away. This explained why my initial complaints about the key policy had been so quickly dismissed by the entire board. The call waiting beep sounded on my phone. The mayor's office. "I've got another call, detective. Please keep me updated." I switched calls to hear Mayor Adams himself on the line. "We need your help," he said without preamble. "The entire HOA board has either been arrested or resigned. Pine Haven Gardens needs emergency leadership until elections can be held." "Mayor Adams, I've only lived here 3 months. Surely there's someone with more experience." "You're exactly what we need. Someone new, not connected to the old system. And you've already proven you care about the community's safety." The city council voted unanimously to appoint me interim HOA president if I'd accept. My dream house had turned into a nightmare, and now I was being asked to help fix the entire community. I thought about saying no, about selling the house and moving somewhere without an HOA. But then I thought about Eleanor and the other neighbors who had been victimized. "I'll do it," I said finally. "When's the first meeting?" "Tonight at 7, the community center, and fair warning, it's going to be heated." That was an understatement. When I walked into the community center that evening, the room was packed with angry, frightened residents. Some were yelling, others were crying, and everyone was demanding answers. I took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. The room gradually quieted. "My name is Alex Morgan. 3 months ago, I moved into my dream home in Pine Haven Gardens. Within days, I was being bullied to hand over my house keys to people who we now know were planning to rob me." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "I'm not a politician or a community organizer. I'm just a homeowner who wants to feel safe like all of you. I can't undo what's happened, but together we can rebuild this community the right way." For 2 hours, we talked. People shared their experiences, homes entered without permission, items missing that they'd been too afraid to report, intimidation when they questioned HOA decisions. The magnitude of Diane's scheme was staggering. A week later, the police allowed me to see the evidence from Diane's motel room, hoping I could help identify stolen items. Among the jewelry and electronics was something that made my blood run cold: a set of master keys labeled with addresses, including one to my house that I had never given anyone. "How did they get this?" I asked Detective Miller. "Kevin apprenticed at Locksmith Express on Main Street. He made copies of customers' keys and kept records of their addresses." This explained how they'd been entering homes before the owners surrendered their HOA keys. The scheme was even more calculated than we'd thought. The following month brought Diane and Kevin's preliminary hearing. I sat in the courtroom watching as they entered in handcuffs. Diane's designer clothes had been replaced by a jail jumpsuit, her carefully styled hair now flat and showing gray roots. When she spotted me, her eyes narrowed with pure hatred. I held her gaze steadily until she looked away. The evidence against them was overwhelming. In addition to my recordings and security footage, police had recovered stolen property from a storage unit, matched Kevin's fingerprints to unsolved break-ins, and found their detailed records of every theft. They faced multiple felony counts of burglary conspiracy and extortion. As the judge denied bail, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. They wouldn't be returning to Pine Haven anytime soon. Our first official HOA meeting under new leadership took place in my backyard. I'd removed the formal meeting structure instead, setting up picnic tables where neighbors could actually get to know each other. First order of business, I announced, is voting on our new bylaws. Most important among them, no HOA member or officer may ever demand or hold keys to any resident home. The vote was unanimous. Eleanor approached me afterward, clutching a plate of cookies. "I wasn't sure I'd live to see this day," she said. "For years, we lived in fear of that woman." "Why didn't anyone report her sooner?" I asked gently. "When you're older, sometimes people don't take you seriously. I tried once, told the previous board my concerns. Diane convinced them I was confused, maybe starting dementia." Her eyes filled with tears. After that, I just tried to keep my head down. I put my arm around her shoulders. "Well, you're the new vice president now. Nobody's going to dismiss you again." 6 months later, Pine Haven Gardens has transformed. We replaced intimidation with community events, punitive fines with neighbor assistance programs. When the Smiths' basement flooded, 20 neighbors showed up with pumps and fans. When Eleanor needed her roof repaired, the community organized a fundraiser. My dream house finally feels like home. Last week, I installed a little free library by my front porch. The first book I placed inside was about home security. Diane and Kevin eventually accepted plea deals, 15 and 10 years respectively. The judge ordered them to pay restitution to all the families they'd stolen from, though most items had sentimental value no money could replace. Sometimes I think about that first confrontation with Diane, how close I came to giving in just to avoid conflict. One small stand against a bully revealed a criminal enterprise and brought a community together. Yesterday, a young couple moved in across the street. Diane's old house sold at auction to pay restitution. I walked over with a welcome basket and introduced myself as their neighbor, not as the HOA president. As we chatted, the husband mentioned they'd chosen Pine Haven specifically because they'd heard about our community spirit. "Is it true what they say," he asked, "that this all started because someone refused to hand over their house keys?" I smiled. Sometimes the smallest decisions have the biggest impact. Speaking of which, here's our HOA welcome packet. You'll notice right on top, you never have to give anyone your keys. They looked relieved, and I realized once again how something as simple as respecting people's boundaries can be the foundation of a true community. My dream house had become part of something bigger, a neighborhood where people looked out for each other, not out of obligation, but because we'd learnt the hard way what happens when trust is broken. And those special keys that started it all, they're framed in the community center alongside a simple plaque that reads, "Sometimes saying no is the key to a better community." This story highlights the critical importance of standing firm on your boundaries, especially when something feels inherently wrong. Even seemingly small concessions can have significant consequences, particularly when dealing with individuals who seek control or have ulterior motives. Furthermore, it underscores the power of community vigilance and collective action. While one person's resistance can be the catalyst, true change and security often come from neighbors supporting one another and refusing to tolerate abuse of power. Always trust your gut, know your rights, like reviewing HOA documents, and don't be afraid to challenge suspicious demands, even if it seems easier to comply. What would you have done in this situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this story and subscribe to the channel for more tales of homeowners navigating the unexpected twists and turns of community living.